Hey everyone, for those of you who haven't been here before, my name is Derek Royden. I write a regular story every week for a website called nationofchange.org. I also usually do one of these vlogs. So today I thought we might get to something kind of a little bit more fun than usual, although I guess it's kind of scary at the same time. It's an article by Jessica McDonald. She's basically doing a fact check on what Donald Trump said about climate change in a recent Washington Post interview. I believe it was on November 27th. And so the title of the article is "The Science Trump Got Wrong in the Post Interview." In his interview with the Post, President Donald Trump made a series of inaccurate statements. He questioned the cause of climate change, praised a non-existent method for wildfire prevention, and even recycled a long-debunked news story from the 1970s. The president explained, among other things, that he does not accept the findings of the National Climate Assessment. This was actually something I wrote about this week, so if you want to check out that article on Nation of Change, you can find it here on the blog. A government report released on Black Friday that details the current and potential impact of climate change on the United States. It should be noted that one of the reasons why you would drop something on like Thanksgiving in the States or on a holiday or, on this case on Black Friday is because you're assuming that people are not going to get this news. And actually this kind of backfired this time because for the first time in a long time, both CNN and MSNBC really actually did cover a climate-related story. Of course, it was basically to go after the president, but you know what? That's fine, as long as they're talking about it. So we get to on why he was skeptical of the recently released climate assessment report. Trump said, "One of the problems that a lot of people like myself, we have very high levels of intelligence, but we're not necessarily such believers. You look at our air and our water, and it's right now at a record clean." Just in terms of making sense, this is an incredible statement. But as McDonald goes on to say, it's Jessica McDonald who wrote this, Trump's response conflates the impact of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases on global warming and climate change with the impact of air and water pollution on the environment. So this is a pretty important distinction. It's one of the more interesting things, or maybe scary things about Donald Trump, is that it's not so much that he's not intelligent, I mean he isn't, but it's that he's completely incurious about anything, and we see it time and time again. But when it comes to like something like climate change, it's dangerously so. In fact, when it comes to greenhouse gases, the U.S. is one of the worst offenders, making the point that although air and water in the United States is fairly decent, in terms of actual greenhouse gases, the country is, as she said, one of the worst offenders. According to the International Energy Agency, in 2016, the U.S. produced more CO2 than any other country except for China, and we have to bear in mind the huge population differences. Moreover, while air and water quality have generally improved over time, the U.S. is not the cleanest country, something Trump has claimed in the past. And it's funny because Trump will say things and he'll be corrected and corrected and corrected again, and he'll continue saying them. And there are people in his base who would just rather simply take unquestioningly what he says. Continuing his explanation of why he does not accept the findings of the climate assessment report, which we can be sure he didn't read because it's like well over 1,000 pages. If you go back and if you look at articles, they talked about global freezing. They talked about at some point the planets could have freeze to death. This is actually a direct quote. And then it's going to die of heat exhaustion. Trump appears to be referring to news articles from the 1970s that suggested the Earth might soon undergo a dramatic cooling. Other politicians in the past, including Senator Ted Cruz, have made the same argument to rebut scientists' concerns today about a warming world. Cruz begins talking about climate change. There's a video attached to the article. You can watch it after if you so desire. There will be a link to the article below. In particular, a 1975 Newsweek story by journalist Peter Gwynn warned of cooler temperatures and reduced crop yields. But Gwynn later admitted he erred in his reporting, and critically, there was never a consensus among scientists at the time that global cooling was coming in the future. Even then, more scientists were worried about warming. And this is something that's very important. There's a lot of science that gets debunked over time, but I mean, so far, and we've really known about greenhouse gas emissions and how they can trap the heat since the 1850s. So this is not something that's new. It's just that it wasn't really until the 1970s or early 1980s that people started to realize that this was a growing problem. And now it's gotten to a point, I mean, with wildfires all over the world. Eastern Australia right now is burning. I think there's tens or dozens, if not hundreds of wildfires in Eastern Australia. We're seeing the visible effects of this. We're beginning to see them. And, the fear is that with temperature rise, these things are just going to get worse and worse. On the causes of climate change, Trump said, as to whether or not it's man-made and whether or not the effects that you're talking about are there, I don't see it, not nearly like it is. As another part of his response to the climate assessment report, Trump rehashed the idea that climate change might not be due to human activity. But climate scientists are not in doubt about this. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's most recent assessment, and this is through the UN, concluded that it is extremely likely, between a 95 and 100% probability, that the majority of the increase in global surface temperature between 1951 and 2010 was due to humans. This conclusion is even more confident than in previous reports. And this is important to note because this is one thing that people who deny the science behind climate change often bring up. Well, how can we know if human beings are responsible for it? We have to be able to trust the experts on this. And I think it's the consensus is it's well above 90% of climate scientists agree that global warming is a reality and that climate change, I should say, is a reality. Indeed, the National Climate Assessment unequivocally states global average temperature has increased by about 1.8 Fahrenheit from 1901 to 2016, and observational evidence does not support any credible natural explanations for this amount of warming. Instead, the evidence consistently points to human activities, especially emissions of greenhouse or heat-trapping gases like methane, as the dominant cause. On wildfires and forest management in California. And this is another brutal one because, if you don't know what you're talking about, especially when you're dealing with a tragedy, I mean, so many people died in California this year due to wildfires. You should just really keep your mouth shut. But he just simply cannot shut up, even when he went to California. On wildfires and forest management in California, I was watching the firemen, and they're raking brush. The tumbleweed and brush, and all this stuff that's growing underneath. It's on fire, and they're raking it, working so hard. And they're raking all this stuff. If that was raked in the beginning, there'd be nothing to catch on fire. It's very interesting to see. A lot of the trees, they took tremendous burn at the bottom, but they didn't catch on fire. The bottom is all burned, but they didn't catch on fire because they sucked the water. They're wet. You need forest management. They don't have it, and they don't have it in California. I guess speaking of, just reading that aloud. Here, Trump repeats the notion that if California had done forest raking, the state could have avoided 2 recent catastrophic fires. Forest raking, however, is not a fire management technique. Timo Kulavainen, I said that wrong, I apologize to you, Timo, a forest scientist at the University of Helsinki, told us in an email, raking is not done in forests. And University of Arizona disturbance ecologist Erica Newman explained that while forest management is an important tool for limiting the severity of wildfires in certain types of ecosystems, it wouldn't have helped in either of California's latest fires. The Woolsey Fire, burning in Southern California, wasn't consuming trees, but rather a type of woody shrubbery called chaparral, and management can make the fire risk go up. And the Camp Fire in Northern California was driven by wind, meaning that removal of trees or other flammable material wouldn't have prevented its spread. So this is just a way to look at how, someone like Trump and, a lot of people in the Republican Party in the United States and the Conservative Party in Canada, these are the ways they talk about climate change, although usually in a more literate and more coherent manner. But it is funny to just read the things that Trump says. And I think this is one of the most important things we have to realize is that the time for panic is over. It's time to begin relentlessly mocking and laughing at the President of the United States because he says the most ridiculous things. So instead of worrying so much as they do in mainstream media, look at the things that he says, but also keep an eye on actually the things that he does, because what he's doing are standard Republican things. He promised a lot as part of his populist message to working people, but he hasn't delivered anything. The tax cut he brought was mainly for the rich. Just like Obama, his administration is filled with the same bankers, the same insiders, even perhaps closer to the Bush administration in terms of the number of oil and gas people that are there. Trump is really, really dangerous, but he's not dangerous in the sense of his tone or his personality. He's dangerous in the sense that he is the typical Republican, the typical Reagan Republican. We're back to that, but he's been clever enough, or his advisors have been clever enough, to wrap him in a populist message. And this is, of course, another one of the scarier things about Trump, is that this is a message that's resonating throughout the world because the left has basically left the field of political battle. Aside from a few great people like Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, the left is decimated. So the arguments that could be made that would convince working people are often now being made on the right. And this is a huge problem for us in terms of our messaging and in terms of the future. So on that note, I'd like to say have a great day, and always remember,